Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm Axel Wilkinson, here to look at the Sphere tool in HitFilm 2 Ultimate. This tool is super convenient for creating spheres, and can be used to make orbs, suns, moons, planets, or Pluto. I miss Pluto. Basically, this tool warps your rectangular layer and maps it onto a sphere. So let's look at some examples. Now, using the sphere effect, which is located in the Generate folder, is as simple as dragging it onto the layer you want to apply it to. So, other than this first layer, I've already added the effect to all the other layers we'll look at. And what we'll focus on here is adjusting the sphere controls or using other effects as well to create some cool looking planets. Alright, so this first texture, if I turn the sphere back off, you can see this is just a picture of a stone wall. So I added the sphere effect to create a moon, and then I thought, that's no moon. So I wanted to see what effects I could use to enhance the appearance of this being perhaps a space station of some sort. In the sphere controls, the surface texture section gives us control over how the image is mapped over the surface of our sphere. So by default it's at a scale of 100, but by bringing that scale down, we're basically decreasing the size of the texture so that more copies of it are used to cover the sphere, and that in effect makes the entire sphere seem bigger by adding more detail. So now if I zoom in, we have a lot more detail on the surface of that sphere. To add more definition to that texture, I used an unsharpen effect just to add some grit and make it a little more metallic feeling. In the surface texture controls, you can also adjust how the multiple copies of the texture relate to one another. By default, they reflect. That's how they're wrapped onto the sphere, which is why you see spots like this, where there's basically the texture here, and then it's mirrored on the opposite side. There's a reflection of it, and that way you don't see any hard lines where the edges are. Now, if we were to switch this to tile, then the edges become much more obvious of each texture. But if you had a texture that was set up for tiling, this option is great, and you can have a virtually seamless texture over the entire sphere. But for most general images, the reflect is going to give you the least noticeable tiling effect. Let's also look at the position controls. Like many of the other effects in HitFilm 2, you can kind of convert this 2D effect into 3D space by transforming it from another layer. And so on the timeline here, I have a point I've created called center point. So if we transform this from the center point, then we can go back, and I've actually set this up so that the point has rotation animated into it. And then if we play the timeline, you can see that planet rotating. Pretty nifty, right? Okay, so there's our first example. The next example is this texture of a piece of stone. I turn on the sphere effect, and there's another potential planet texture for a different type of planet. In the sphere controls, let's look at the environment map setting. Here you can control how the environment of the scene affects the appearance of the texture. Now by default, it's just taking black and using that as an environment map and darkening the edges of the sphere. If I go into the reflection and turn the amount down to 0, see how there's just the basic sphere, but then with that environment map darkening the edges, it really helps to create the sphere illusion so it doesn't just look like a circle. So we can use another specific layer as an environment map if we want. So let's just scroll down and we'll select that first texture we used, the stone wall. And you can see how that immediately changes the appearance of the edges there. And if we adjust the angle dependency, you can see how at 0, we just have that stone wall being reflected into the surface. And here, if we hit play, it looks as if we're no longer rotating for this layer. But in fact, I have set up the rotation already. It's set up to the center point. But we're just seeing the reflection. It's like the ball has a completely mirrored finish, so all we're seeing is the reflected environment map. So let's adjust the angle dependency until we can see a bit of the texture underneath. And now if I hit play, see how you can kind of see that other texture rotating underneath the reflection? So that's how the environment map works. You can adjust the amount of the reflection with the amount slider, and then how much of the surface of the sphere reflects is controlled by the angle dependency. Okay, let's take a look at our next one. This is just obviously a picture of some water. Let me select that layer. I applied the sphere effect, and then I wanted to just add a little bit more punch to that texture. And so I added a parallax effect, and you can see how that really defines the texture. And as this rotates, you can see how that gives us a different sort of cool effect to this planet. Okay, fairly simple. Now I did incidentally add a light to the project just so that the parallax effect would display properly, because it kind of needs a light to really do its thing. Okay, up next, this is another picture of water with a bit of foam from the beach surf. And here I added the sphere effect, and I didn't really like the colors that I was getting there. And so I used a levels histogram effect just to punch those up and alter the colors a little bit to get a little bit more blue into those green areas and a little bit brighter white into the foam. Hopefully you can see how by just grabbing these random photos of various textures, there's a lot of different options that we can take and apply the sphere effect to create a whole solar system's worth of different planets. Okay, next we have some flames, and here's the sphere effect applied, which doesn't really look much like a planet, but I thought just to add a little bit more liveliness into it, I'd add a waves effect. And now if we play it, you can see how still not a planet, but for some sort of orb or, some interesting effect, you could do some cool things with that. Okay, on to this image, which is just some surface rust on a piece of metal. There's the sphere effect applied, and my first thought with this one was to do something sort of like Mars, a red planet. And so I used levels to boost the reds up a bit, and then I thought, ooh, maybe what if this was glowing? And so I added a glow effect just to make it look a bit hotter. So there's that, which is kind of cool. But then I thought, what if we really wanted to make it glow, make it more like a star? And so I added another glow effect with a larger radius, bigger than the planet. And so there's that, which turned out pretty sweet. So there's another option, using levels and a couple of glow effects just to create sort of a star appearance. This image is just a piece of rough leather, and so there it is as a sphere. Already not bad, but I wanted to get a little bit more of that texture, a little bit more definition into it. So I used a vibrance effect, and that really brings out the texture and the contrast and a little bit more color in that layer as well. So I think both versions of this texture, both before and after the vibrance, work really well to make a pretty sweet looking planet. Okay, this one is an aerial shot which I just took out the window of an airplane. I've tweaked the color a little bit of the original photo. If we apply the sphere effect, there's that. In the sphere controls, the surface texture has another control called scale ratio. And this basically just controls the ratio of the texture vertically to horizontally and how it's mapped onto the sphere. So if we increase this to around 4, we get some cool horizontal lines wrapping around the planet. You will have noticed that you could see the seam on this particular image. Obviously, that's where the texture ends. It's being wrapped all the way around the sphere, but since this is a planet, in most cases, you're not going to see a planet make a complete rotation in the context of a scene. So you can actually get quite a bit of rotation out of the effect before that seam is visible. So as you can see, that's still turning pretty fast for a planet, but just now that seam is coming back into view. So in some cases, that might cause an issue, but most times you can work around that seam and get plenty of orbit into the planets if your scene calls for it. Okay, moving on. Here is just a picture of clouds. I have lots of these. Let me select that layer. We'll turn on the sphere, and boom, it's a blue planet. So that's a really easy way to make a nice watery planet. And then I used vibrance here again, just to alter the colors a bit and give a little bit more definition to it. So let's see that one in action. Not a bad little planet, just from an image of some clouds. And in this case, the vibrance wasn't an essential part. It was just a way to create a variation, because this looks decent as a planet as well. Just to tweak that further, or to modify the color, you could use an effect such as vibrance. Okay, next. This is a picture of some ice, and it had a whole bunch of bubbles in it. And so here's this applied to a sphere. Let's look at another of the sphere controls here. In the scale, you might remember we have a scale control for the surface texture here, but these scale controls actually control the shape of the sphere. So here, if we adjust Y, we can flatten our sphere right down into a pancake. Right, so there it is. You can see it when I set it rotating, it has sort of a flying saucer type shape that we've created there. If I select the center point, let's change its orientation there, you can see the shape that we've created there. So that's kind of cool. And since this reminded me kind of a flying saucer, I used a levels histogram effect just to reduce the color and the contrast and make it a little bit more shiny. Now if we set that playing, there you can see how we just have kind of created a saucer type shape using the sphere control. So there's another cool application of the effect. Now here, this is a plane to which I have applied a fractal noise effect. In this case, it's a swirl set to cubic interpolation, and there's the sphere effect applied. Now, with fractal noise, you could create a whole variety of different types of textures. This is convenient because everything is procedurally created within the program. But if we change to clouds or we change to wood, you can see how we get a variety of different textures, and we could tweak the colors in the appearance controls for the fractal noise to procedurally generate planet surfaces. Okay, and this last one we're going to look at, this is actually a composite shot, and if I open that up, it's containing a particle effect, which is based on the dragon's breath, which I've pointed right toward the camera. So there's that animated effect. This is essentially the same as using a video clip as a source for the texture. So here we have this animated clip, and we'll apply our sphere effect. So that's pretty cool. Maybe we can go back in. We'll transform this one from the center point to create some rotation. And then since this one was already all fiery and bright, I thought, why not try make another sun type effect or a star and add a glow to it. And this is handy because often planets have a glow as well. When you see them in a space scene, the atmosphere around the planet creates a glow. And so this could be used to create an atmospheric glow too. Basically, just after the sphere effect, I applied a neon glow effect. I've adjusted it to be orange since this is a bright kind of fiery star anyway. And so there's the results of that. So if you want to create a glow around your planets, the neon glow is a good option for handling that. So there's a few ideas for creating planets using the sphere effect in HitFilm 2 Ultimate, and some ideas for combining that with other effects to adjust the appearance or create different types of planets to suit the needs of your scene. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, fare thee well.